Hey everyone, thank you so much for checking out this video. My name is Jason W. Hoyt. You can find out more about me and all that I'm involved in at jasonwhoyt.com. That's jasonwhoyt.com. It's at the bottom of that screen there. I'm the author of the book Consent of the Governed, The People's Guide to Holding Government Accountable. And I don't know if you can see at the bottom of that tagline there on the book cover, it says, "We don't have to wait for elections," and that's the good news. But a little bit more about myself. I've been very involved in the Tea Party movement for quite a number of years. Since the very beginning, God put me at the right place at the right time. I was on the original conference calls that launched the movement February of 2009. It's been an awakening for me and for millions of other people around the country ever since. And it's really since then I wanted to dig into the truth. We've had some successes in various election cycles, but yet our rights are still being trampled upon. We're still $18+ trillion in debt nationally. And the Bureau of Land Management, for example, just in recent cases are trampling on the rights of ranchers and folks in the West. And there's a whole story with that. I'll tell you about it in a little bit. But a couple of years ago, I wanted to do a deep dive on the word accountability, which I'm going to talk about today. As you can see there, I've been on Greta Van Susteren. I've been on Glenn Beck. I do interviews. I've traveled the country. I've hosted rallies. I've emceed rallies, been a part of rallies. I'm part of what I call this great awakening that's going on in this country, where people are just digging in and they want to know the truth. They're tired of being lied to. Well, today in this video here, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about first some key and foundational aspects of the book, things you need to understand before digging into the book. I'm going to talk today about the empty promise of accountability. I'll tell you what that means in just a moment, but think about the word accountability. What does it really mean? Today, I'm also going to talk about the tired rallying cry, and we're all guilty of it. We all say it. But man, we're tired from it, and it just doesn't seem to be working. I'm also going to uncover the most powerful word in the Constitution. You're going to be surprised about what it is, but think about that in your own terms. Think about the last time you read the Constitution. What do you think is the most powerful word? And there's a really good chance that you won't know what word I'm talking about, and you won't understand the power behind it. But that's coming up in just a little bit. I'm also going to talk about how the people are supposed to act as a sword and a shield. All right, that's coming up in here in a little bit as well. And we're going to talk about how and when the people's most powerful weapon was hijacked, and why every politician should fear my book. But most importantly, as I said, you're going to discover why we don't have to wait for elections to hold our government accountable. Interesting. All right, here we go. But first, facepalm headlines. You guys know what a facepalm is? A facepalm is when you're shocked by something. You're like, oh, you got to be kidding. And then you slam your palm to your face. Well, here's some headlines that will surprise you. For example, Oregon man sentenced to 30 days in jail for collecting rainwater on his own property. Remember the whole email scandal with the IRS? Well, this report on Breitbart said Lois Lerner's emails show that Obama's Justice Department assisted the IRS to target conservative groups. No surprise there, I guess. IRS seizes first, asks questions later. I'm going to tell this story in a little while. Federal workers owe more than $3.5 billion with a B dollars in unpaid taxes. And this story was as of last March. $3.5 billion in unpaid taxes. Here in Orlando, a judge says because of that soccer stadium, they were going to use eminent domain to take some people's land. The people's land was a church they were going to take. They went all the way through eminent domain. A judge says, yep, Orlando can take the land for the soccer stadium. Thankfully, though, cooler heads prevailed, enough public pressure, I believe, and they ended up moving the site of the soccer stadium to where they did not have to use eminent domain. So that's good news. We've seen these stories pop up everywhere. Government shuts down kids' lemonade stands, issues fines. Silent dancing protesters arrested at Jefferson Memorial. If you haven't heard this story, it'll really, well, it'll make you mad. But there's some folks, Adam Kokesh and some others, because they heard about some new ordinance. You're not supposed to dance at the Jefferson Memorial, and they they planned a silent dancing protest. And in this particular YouTube video, you can find it. It's crazy. These guys went up behind Adam Kokesh, picked him up and slammed him to the ground. Adam let it happen because Adam's a big, strong, tough guy. He could have prevented it, but he let it happen. And they're doing this right in they had earbuds in. The music wasn't even loud. And they weren't disturbing anybody. They're quiet and all this. At the feet of the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence, for crying out loud, in Washington, D.C. Here's one city fines couple for hosting Bible studies without a permit. What's a permit? A permit is permission in this country. Can you believe that? Iraq vet says, IRS extorted me, left me no money to run my business. I'll tell that story in a little bit. 90-year-old man, Florida man, arrested for second time in a week after feeding the homeless again. Guys, what country is this? Honestly, what country is this where these things can happen? And there's so many more, and I have a section in my book, Consent to the Governed, where I have a bunch of those facepalm headlines. You'll be upset, but thankfully there is an answer coming up. So here's a few here's a few foundational aspects of the book. It took over 1.5 years to write. It was a long time, a lot of research. A lot of people were helping with the research. They were sending me information. I was finding a ton more and looking over this stuff. There's over 340 references throughout the book. And when you get the ebook, I believe it's a little over 300 of those are hyperlinks to the external material. Some of the references are from the Yale Law Journal, from the Richmond Journal of Law and the Public Interest, William and Mary Law Review, United States Supreme Court, a book I found in 1852. There's one that covers grand juries in America from 1630 to 1942. I quote the Magna Carta. I quote a book on the Magna Carta with a lot of commentaries on it. The same book the Supreme Court quotes in one of their cases. I'll talk about that in just a minute. The Florida Grand Jury Instructions, the Constitution, the Florida Constitution. The point is, in quoting all those references, this was not my idea. I'm not just another guy with just another book who has just another set of opinions about what's wrong with this country, what I think we should do about it. I got a quote from a very good friend in the Tampa area named Tom Gaitens, and he said, Jason's a political archaeologist uncovering what has been there all along. And that's what this book is all about. I initiated this book seeking to understand the word accountability. So think about that. What does accountability really mean? How does accountability and consequences in government manifest itself? What does it look like? What does it look like? Remember this guy, Stephen Miller of the IRS? Remember him? You'll recognize that photo, but we haven't seen him literally since this particular hearing. When the IRS was the most intimidating and powerful agency in the federal government, intimidates people and targets them based on their political beliefs. This guy's hauled off in front of Congress. We've never seen him since. How was he held accountable? Well, here's a story. Obama fires IRS chief over inexcusable tax targeting scandal. Wow, he was fired. Is that really accountability? When someone is fired, they're just removed from their job? The most egregious act by the IRS, targeting people based on their political beliefs, and he's just fired? That's not accountability. But you know what? It gets worse. That same time period, there was another story. Fired IRS commissioner planned to leave post in June. When you look at it, he was in a temporary post. He was leaving in June. He basically retired a month early. That's it. He retired a month early. I'm sure he got full benefits and everything, and we haven't seen him since. That's when Lois Lerner came in, and now she's the scapegoat. Now she's the focus, but not this guy. Where'd this guy go? That's what I want to know. Well, here's the tired rallying cry. We all say it. We have to hold them accountable. We have to hold them accountable to their oath. We have to hold them accountable to the Constitution. But you got to ask one question. How? How do we hold them accountable? The problem is we've been trained to think that the only way to hold them accountable is by waiting for the next election. But you know what? When you look back at what the founders did, severing ties with the king, fighting the world's mightiest military, winning that war, a multi-year war, winning that war, and having an opportunity to create our own system of government. You can't convince me that they created a system where the only way that we the people could hold our elected officials accountable and give our consent to the governed was by waiting for the next election. You just can't convince me of that. There's got to be another way. But do elections really work? Do they actually work? Look at this. 2014, Congress approval rating of 14%. It says 15% here. I've heard numbers of 10, 11%. That's their approval rating. But how many incumbents get reelected? 2014, this particular chart shows 95% in 2014. They have a 15% approval rating, but 95% of them get reelected. So what gives? People hate Congress, but most incumbents get reelected. What gives? What's the deal? Is the system rigged? Is there too much money in the election season, the special interests and all that? Look, we're upset about it and we can't even get rid of them. So elections don't work, right? Well, what if I was to tell you that we the people could operate on an official capacity outside the branches of government and provide our consent of the governed on a daily basis? What if I told you we the people could reach inside our government and root out corruption with indictments? What if I was to tell you that even the Supreme Court as recent as 1992 said, quote, in fact, the whole theory of its function is that it belongs to no branch of the institutional government, serving as a kind of buffer or referee between the government and the people? What if I told you one of the most powerful tools we the people can use to check and balance the government is already mentioned in the Constitution? Can you imagine that? I mean, what I'm talking about is not a new idea. It already exists. The Supreme Court has already talked about it, and it's already protected in the Constitution. But can you imagine actually holding our government accountable? Fraud consists of some deceitful practice or willful device, resorted to with intent to deprive another of his right. Black's Law Dictionary says fraud includes all acts, omissions, and concealments which involve a breach of legal duty or by which an undue or unconscientious advantage is taken of another. You remember this guy? Jonathan Gruber admitted to committing fraud to get Obamacare passed. Where's the investigation? How are they held accountable? He admitted to committing fraud. Fraud is illegal. Here's another story. IRS committing theft and extortion. Now, this guy was on Greta Van Susteren. You can find him. You can find the interview. His name's Andrew Clyde. I have the interview on my website, jasonwhoyt.com. Fascinating. He's a 3-tour Iraq vet. Comes back, has got a small business, has a gun shop. IRS shows up at his door one day and says, well, we just took $940,000 from your account. They just took it, $940,000 from his account. They said, well, we think you were structuring. A few days later, he gets on a conference call with his attorney, with his accountant, and the IRS, and he's like, what's structuring? Well, civil asset forfeiture, there's this thing with structuring that says, the law was originally put in place to bust drug dealers and to seize their assets and all of that. Well, now the IRS and these federal agencies are using it to take people's money. They took $940,000 of his money. They didn't accuse him of a crime. He wasn't under investigation. He wasn't under arrest. He wasn't put on trial. He wasn't convicted and then his assets taken from him. They just took $940,000 of his money. And structuring is where, when you make a deposit of $10,000 or more in the bank, your bank is required to notify the IRS. Well, if you make a series of cash deposits below $10,000, it looks suspicious and they still report it to the IRS. Well, that happened in his business because of the cash flow of his business. He had a series of transactions below the 10,000 mark. Well, they went in and they took $940,000 of his money. Well, they did an investigation. A few months later, they sent him a letter and say, we did an investigation, and after further review, you in fact did nothing. Would you settle for $600,000 back? Can you believe that? They took $940,000 of his money. They do an investigation afterwards, determine he did nothing wrong, and say, would you settle for $600 back? The balls these people have to have in order to do that is astounding. So he negotiated to get his money back. And in the interview with Greta Van Susteren, he says, well, I had to do a tactical retreat and I settled for $900,000 back. So Greta asks a great question at the end, which I didn't even think of, but it's an obvious question now. She says, well, all in, how much did you lose in attorney's fees and everything? All in, he lost $150,000. Why? What did he do? Nothing. Well, lately, Ted Cruz has been calling for the investigation and prosecution of Planned Parenthood. Apparently, you guys have all seen those videos, right? You've got to look for the Planned Parenthood baby body parts videos where James O'Keefe and actually, it wasn't James O'Keefe, but some other folks went undercover, interviewed some Planned Parenthood executives, and they talked about this, joked about this. Well, apparently, there's already a federal law, 42 U.S. Code 289 G2, strongly prohibits the sale or purchase of aborted fetal tissue. There's already a law. And we have video where they admit it. Ted Cruz has been calling for an investigation and prosecution. Where is it? Why isn't it happening? He asked for a special prosecutor. In fact, excuse me, I get all worked up about this stuff. He's calling for he wants to call for a special prosecutor. But that's like asking the king to investigate himself. That's like asking the federal government to check and balance themselves. They're not doing it. They're not going to do it. So would you agree that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land? Would you agree with that? I hope you do, because in Article 6, Section 2, the U.S. Constitution says this Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. Article 6, Section 3 of the Constitution says the senators and representatives before mentioned and the members of the several state legislatures and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath to support this Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Okay? And every politician and every government agency takes an oath to support the Constitution. So in my research, in my travels, somebody nudges me and he says, hey, when was the last time you read the Fifth Amendment? I'm thinking, all right, it's been a little while. So I dig up the Fifth Amendment and it starts off like this. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So I want to dig into the words. I want to understand them. And in my research, here's what I looked at. I want to define all these words. I want to know how they're defined today. How were they defined 50 years ago, 100 years ago? How were they defined when they were written? And how are they defined before that? Okay? And you'll see how, and this bugs me, words definitions change over time. Okay, so anyways, grand jury. So I summarized, Black's Law from Magna Carta, Wikipedia, a bunch of different sources. And I summarize it like this. A group of people, 25 by common law, that decides if formal charges should be filed in a case before them. A capital crime. Look, we've all heard of it. Capital crime. A crime where the punishment can be death. That's the big ones. That's murder. Infamous crime. Otherwise infamous crime, as it says in the Fifth Amendment. That definition's a little bit all over the place, but in Cornell Law on their website, they define it as fraud and dishonesty. That's a pretty big bucket. That's a very big bucket. So again, nobody can be charged for capital crime or an infamous crime. And it says indictment here, the definition is a charge brought to a grand jury by a prosecutor for approval. So again, here's the grand jury. It's us. It's you and me. It's a jury of peers, 25 by common law. Federal statute today says 23. I'm in Florida. The Florida statute says 21 people. But the days of common law, which we should still be there, there's 25 folks. That's us. The government brings a case to the government brings a case to the grand jury for review. That's the indictment process. But the most powerful word in the Constitution. Did you miss it? Remember back at the definition? Did you miss the most powerful word in the Constitution? And look, prior to me writing this book, prior to me doing this research, I didn't even know that word was in the Constitution, let alone what it meant. I believe the most powerful word in the Constitution is presentment. It's a charge the grand jury brings on their own initiative. Okay, interesting. So again, note the Fifth Amendment, the instruction to the government in the Fifth Amendment in protecting our rights. Remember, the Bill of Rights starts off, Congress shall make no law, uses words like shall not be infringed. The Fifth Amendment says no person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crime, for murder or fraud and dishonesty, which is a really big bucket. Nobody should be charged for these crimes unless by a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So in other words, the grand jury steps up and says, hey, nobody should be charged for these crimes unless we review it. Okay, but let's take a step back. From where do we get the jury system? Now, really, I never really thought about this question either. A lot of people, because it's mentioned so many times in the Constitution, maybe the founders created it, who knew? But through the research, you come to find out, everybody talks about it. A lot of different sources talk about the fact that it was codified in Magna Carta of 1215. And then it was used for centuries in England under common law. And there was actually a statute in 1297, another one in 1300s, that said the common law, that the Magna Carta is the common law. The settlers to America brought the jury system, and namely the grand jury, as early as 1630 to this country, to these lands. And then it was used heavily for decades before the Revolution. Every colony had a grand jury, essentially, when the Constitution was ratified. And then for decades thereafter, we've had grand juries all over the country. So let's dig into some quotes here. The Florida Grand Jury Handbook today says, quote, the grand jury originated more than 7 centuries ago in England. It was recognized in the Magna Carta granted by King John of England upon the demand of the people in 1215 A.D. The early colonists brought the grand jury system to this country from England. It has been with us ever since. That's in the Florida Grand Jury Handbook today. I found that there was a plaque put up by the Virginia State Bar in Jamestown. Virginia State Bar, that's not a pub. That's the Bar Association. So in May of 1959, they put this plaque up commemorating the importance of recognizing how the settlers brought with them the rule of law through the common law of Magna Carta. The plaque reads, here the common law of England was established on this continent with the arrival of the first settlers May 13, 1607. Since Magna Carta, the common law, has been the cornerstone of individual liberties, even as against the crown. Summarized later in the Bill of Rights, its principles have inspired the development of our system of freedom under law, which is at once our dearest possession and proudest achievement. The American Bar Association, several colonial charters included language from the common law Magna Carta. The American Bar Association's website says almost identical language appears in the charters of the other 13 colonies, and several also contain clauses borrowed directly from 39 of Magna Carta. Indicative of the feeling for the charter in Massachusetts is the design that it selected for its seal when it rejected colonial status and formed itself into a commonwealth. The seal depicted a militiaman with a sword in one hand and a copy of Magna Carta in the other. So here's a question for you. Has the Supreme Court ever cited Magna Carta? Because keep in mind, remember, they all swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. That is the supreme law of the land. They don't swear an oath to protect and defend the Magna Carta. So the question is, has the Supreme Court ever cited Magna Carta? The answer is yes. The American Bar Association says the United States Supreme Court first cited Magna Carta in an 1819 opinion, and its citations since then number over 100. All right, so fasten your seatbelts. Check this out. So this was about last spring of 2015. I'm doing this research on Magna Carta, learning all I can about it. It was sealed by King John in June 15 of 1215. So last June was the 800-year anniversary of Magna Carta. And there was a case, Carey versus Dinn, that was decided on June 15th, 2015 by Supreme Court. On the 800th anniversary, on the 800-year anniversary of Magna Carta, they decide this case, Carey versus Dinn, June 15, 2015. In that case, they say the Due Process Clause has its origin in Magna Carta. As originally drafted, the Great Charter, that's what they call Magna Carta, provided that, quote, no freeman shall be taken or imprisoned or be disseized of his freehold or liberties or free customs or be outlawed or exiled or any otherwise destroyed. Nor will we not pass upon him nor condemn him, but by lawful judgment of his peers, or by the law of the land. This is from Coke, Fascinating how they cite Magna Carta, and they say the due process clause gained its inspiration by the Magna Carta. The court has recognized that at the time of the Fifth Amendment's ratification, the words due process of law were understood to convey the same meaning as the words by the law of the land in Magna Carta. Interesting. They said describe the scope of the interest that could be deprived only pursuant to the law of the land. Magna Carta, he wrote, ensured that without due process, no man may be taken or imprisoned or disseized of his lands, etc., etc. So the Constitution was inspired by Magna Carta. That one was talking about the due process clause, where it says, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. They linked that to Magna Carta Clause 39. I read that, no freeman shall be taken or imprisoned, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. That's what they said there. There was another case exactly 1 week later, June 22nd, 2015, that was decided. Horn versus Department of Agriculture. I won't read all that, but here's the deal. Horn family, raisin growers in California. Apparently, the Department of Agriculture, since 1937, had this program where raisin growers in California, you had to give a percentage of your crops to the federal government, and the Department of Agriculture will sell them on your behalf because they're so good to you. And then they will return all the profits to you minus their administration fees, of course. Well, the administration fees got so high that after the Department of Agriculture required them to take a percentage of the crops from the raisin growers, in this case the Horn family, the admin fees were so high that no profits were going to be returned to the family. And the Horn family said, you know what? I don't need this program. It's going to take my crops and not give me any money in return. I can do this on my own. So they stopped giving it to them. The Department of Agriculture fined and fees and all this kind of stuff, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the Horn family had enough. They had the guts to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. And check this out. 1 week after the 800-year anniversary of Magna Carta, the Supreme Court, in an 8-1 decision, 8-1, and of course, who do you think the one is? Sotomayor. 8-1, they side in favor of the family. Why? This principle, dating back as far as Magna Carta, was codified in the Takings Clause, in part because of property appropriations on both sides of the Revolutionary War, et cetera, et cetera. They said the Takings Clause provides, nor shall be private property be taken for public use without just compensation. That's in the Fifth Amendment. It protects private property without any distinction between different types. The principle reflected in the clause goes back at least 800 years to Magna Carta, which specifically protected agricultural crops from uncompensated takings. So Supreme Court sides with the raisin farmers and said that program since 1937 is unconstitutional. So again, just to review, the Fifth Amendment says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. In addition, so what that's linked to is Clause 28 of Magna Carta. No constable or other bailiff of ours shall take corn or other provisions from anyone without immediately tendering money therefor. Guys, there's nothing new under the sun. For 800 years, we the people have been trying to get the government to get away from us and leave us alone and protect ourselves with the Fifth Amendment, with Clause 28 of Magna Carta saying, look, quit taking our crops without paying us. And in the Constitution, the Fifth Amendment says for public use. You need to justify how that is for public use before you even take it, let alone the fact that you have to compensate us. So question, are there any other clauses in Magna Carta that inspired the Constitution? Clause 61 says, petition to have that transgression redressed without delay. Petition, redressed, interesting. That's the First Amendment, folks. And to petition the government for a redress of grievances. What else do we have? 52 says, without the legal judgment of his peers. So that can be linked, obviously, to the Constitution, Article 3, Section 2, Clause 3, the trial of all crimes shall be by jury. In addition, in the Seventh Amendment, it says the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. That's where the jury essentially originated or was codified, where the people says, look, we're not going to be judged by the government. We want to be judged by a jury of our peers. So in the research, the grand jury has been referenced throughout history as a sword and a shield. Why? It's a shield because it protects people from wrongful accusations by government. Because remember, that's the point. It's us. The Fifth Amendment says no person shall be charged for these crimes unless a grand jury takes a look at it first. The grand jury stands up and says, hey, stop. We're going to take a look at it before you drag those people into court and accuse them in the public eye and drag them through an expensive trial. We're going to take a look at it first. But it's also a sword because it has the power to reach inside the government and root out corruption. That's the presentment power, where they can initiate their own investigations, where they can bring charges on their own. They don't have to wait for the prosecutor. They have to wait for a special prosecutor. They have to wait for the government to do it. That's the whole point. That's why it's the most powerful word in the Constitution. So today's federal grand jury handbook says in their opening paragraphs, the grand jury operates both as a sword, authorizing the government's prosecution of suspected criminals, and also as a shield, protecting citizens from unwarranted or inappropriate prosecutions. The Florida grand jury instructions say this: you always should keep in mind that the grand jury is both a sword and a shield. A sword because the power of the grand jury has a chilling and deterrent effect on those who violate the law. It's a shield because of its power and duty to protect the innocent against persecution. All right. So through the research, I believe there are 5 essential elements of a grand jury, and here's how I've assembled them. It must remain secret. It must remain independent and unencumbered. They must judge the law. They must be accessible by the public, and they must be made up of unfiltered peers. So let's review these real quick. They must remain secret to protect witnesses, the accused, and other jurors. It has to be secret. The angry mob outside in Ferguson. Remember, Ferguson was about a grand jury trial. They were looking to, should they indict the police officers? And the angry mob outside wanted to intimidate them, but they don't know who's on the grand jury. Other politicians and government officials, and they don't know who's on a grand jury because it's supposed to be secret. The media, what do? They attack someone, they personalize it and ridicule them and dig into every person's background. Well, it's supposed to remain secret in protection of them as well as witnesses. Witnesses want to be able to go in there and speak freely. So it must remain secret. They also must be independent and Now, by the way, let me jump in here real quick. Go to jasonwhoyt.com. You've got to get the book. I'm only scratching the surface on what I'm putting together in this presentation. There is so much more background information and law review articles that support this stuff. It's insane. But this point must be independent and unencumbered. 1852, this trial by jury book, Lysander Spooner said, no directions can legally be imposed upon them by any court or judges. An honest jury will thankfully accept good advice. Remember that. They will thankfully accept good advice from judges as their assistants, but they are bound by their oaths to present the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, to the best of their own and not the judge's knowledge. Neither can they, without breach of that oath, resign their consciences or blindly submit to the dictates of others, and therefore ought to receive or reject such advices as they judge them good or bad. They have to be independent, not influenced by the judge. The judge's instructions, what are they? What is the judge telling, when you're on a jury, what is the judge telling you can and cannot do? Well, what are you supposed to do? Thankfully accept their good advice, or thank them for their good advice. But here's the deal. The Richmond Journal of Law and the Public Interest, in an article, it says, this particular quote, one federal judge recently wrote that in 23 years of occasionally examining grand jury transcripts, he had never once seen a case where prosecutors gave grand juries accurate legal instructions. What are the grand jury instructions? Rule 2.6 state for the Florida grand jury. It says a state attorney will advise and counsel the grand jury as its legal advisor, and while you do not have to follow that advice, you should give it strong consideration. But what's the problem? What's going on today? Today we have that cliche, which is more than a cliche. It's the reality. A prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. Why? They control everything that goes on in there. They shouldn't, but they do. It's because we don't know the history. We don't know the power of the grand jury and our responsibility and capabilities, frankly. Now, a grand jury and a jury must also judge the law. 1852, this book, again, it said, for more than 600 years since Magna Carta in 1215, there has been no clearer principle. It is their right and their primary and paramount duty to judge of the justice of the law and to hold all laws invalid that are, in their opinion, unjust or oppressive, and all persons guiltless in violating or resisting the execution of such laws. All right, Chief Justice Harlan Stone said, if a juror feels that the statute involved in any criminal offense is unfair, or that it infringes upon the defendant's natural God-given unalienable or constitutional rights, then it is his duty to affirm that the offending statute is really no law at all, and that the violation of it is no crime at all, for no one is bound to obey an unjust law. That was a U.S. Chief Justice. No one is bound to obey an unjust law. So what does he say? If you're on a jury, not guilty, no indictment, okay? That's your response. Thomas Jefferson said in a letter to Thomas Paine in 1789, I consider trial by jury as the only anchor yet devised by man by which a government can be held to the principles of its constitution. We must judge the law. So where do you think this was written? I'm going to read a couple paragraphs here. Tell me where you think this was written. When the English colonists came to America, they brought with them many of the institutions of the English legal system, including the grand jury. Thus, the English tradition of the grand jury was well established in the American colonies long before the American Revolution. Indeed, the colonists used it as a platform from which to assert their independence from the pressures of colonial governors. In 1735, for example, the colonial governor of New York demanded the grand jury indict and for libel John Zanger, editor of a newspaper called the Weekly Journal, because he had held up to scorn certain acts of the royal governor. The grand jury flatly refused. Where was that? That story was told in a federal grand jury handbook, talking about how a grand jury, look, there was a statute that says you can't talk bad about the king, but John Zanger's newspaper talked bad about the king. They go before a grand jury. In fact, this story didn't say it, but I found in other research, they went to 2 different grand juries. Both of them said no indictment. But look, here's the deal. They said something bad about the king. There's a statute that says you can't say something bad about the king. The grand jury looked at it and said, yeah, he did that, but we're going to judge the law, no indictment. The grand jury flatly refused, the federal grand jury handbook says. So even today, grand jurist, we have the responsibility to judge the law. William and Mary Law Review in 2014 had an article that said the grand jury was an agent of the community, not simply an agent of the defendant. The grand jury's role was to represent the local community and thus act more independently of all the instruments of central authority, including the state or national legislature. The grand jury served to check the legislature by its power not to follow the law and not to indict people under the law. All right, here's another point. The grand jury must be accessible by the public. Florida Grand Jury Handbook today says charges of crime may be brought to your attention in several ways: by the court, by the state attorney, from personal knowledge brought to your body, or by any member of the grand jury, and lastly, by private citizens who have a right to be heard by a grand jury. So here in Florida, did you guys hear anything about the envelope test? A couple years ago, I became aware of some folks who wanted to test the theory that we should have access to our grand jury because it says it right there in the instructions. So they picked 7 random counties throughout Florida. They put an envelope inside the envelope, and they sent it to the clerk of court, care of the grand jury foreman, for their eyes only. Now, because the grand jury is secret, only the grand jury foreman can be made known, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that sign off on the paperwork, so they can be made known to the public. So they sent these envelopes to 7 different counties, and take a guess how many of them opened them and got them to the foreman. Yeah, you guessed it, none. So look, we're supposed to have access to the grand jury, but they're being blocked. Now, I encourage you to test that theory in your area as well. I'm sure you're aware of some criminal activity, at least some that needs to be investigated. So let your grand jury know. Call up the clerk of court. Say, hey, I want the grand jury to investigate something. They'll probably send you to the prosecutor. But what if it's the prosecutor that needs investigating? What if it's a state attorney that needs investigating? What if it's the sheriff? Who do you go to? You're supposed to be able to go to an independent body of the people, the grand jury. Now, that grand jury is supposed to be made up of unfiltered peers. What's your peer? Who are your peers? Look in the health study journal or health journals. The latest peer-reviewed study comes out. There's a peer-reviewed study on cholesterol, right, or on the heart. Who do they have review that? Who are the peers? Do they ask for a plumber, an accountant, and an airline pilot? Or is a peer-reviewed study reviewed by someone who has similar education, similar background, someone who understands you and your circumstances? That's what a peer is supposed to be. So last year, I was following this case where this pastor was attacked by the IRS. They weren't paying their people as employees. They were paying them as contractors. He called them missionaries, blah, blah, blah. It's just a technical issue with the money and all that. The IRS goes after him. He served 10 years in prison. Well, as he got out, while he was in prison, his land was taken and auctioned off, and the proceeds went to. So look, this is going to come up in a little bit. His land was taken, auctioned off, and the money went to who? Went to the government. It didn't go to restore some victim. It was just a dollars and cents thing. Well, he serves 10 years. He gets out, and when he gets out, he gets arrested again for mail fraud, conspiracy to commit mail fraud, and contempt of court. Why? Because they sent, his accountant sent a letter to the people who bought his land at auction to let them know, hey, you just bought some land at auction that used to be owned by a pastor who was blah, blah, blah. There should be appeal process, all this. The court didn't want him to do that. He goes to trial last spring after serving 10 years. He gets out, gets arrested. He had a trial last spring. And I read this report. It says, on day one of the trial, the jury was selected. A Baptist minister was dismissed as a juror, and all the potential jurors were asked whether or not they served in the military or had military members in their family. It was all too obvious that the prosecution was hoping to select an uninformed, unsophisticated, and constitutionally ignorant jury that they hoped to manipulate. That's what they do. A jury is supposed to be made up of unfiltered peers, people who understand you, have like background, people right there from your community. So here's a pop quiz. Pop quiz. Where in the Constitution was the grand jury created? Now, usually when I do this in presentations, and I've traveled throughout Florida lately. Actually, this book just came out in September. I've gone to 14 different counties throughout Florida to do this presentation. Every time I come here, somebody raises their hand and says, Fifth Amendment, you already mentioned it. No, I said, where was the grand jury created? Because look, what's the point of the Constitution? The Constitution, written by, quote unquote, we the people, gave form, gave life to the government. Now, where do we get our rights? Let's back up. Where do we get our rights? Our rights come from God, not from man. Our rights don't come from the government. Man predates government. We, the people, created the Constitution. We created the government. We wrote the Constitution to create the government and delegate and give some of our rights and responsibilities. Actually, no, we didn't give them our rights. We gave them the ability, the power, the authority to protect our rights. The Declaration of Independence says, and to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So how do we do that? Article 1 of the Constitution, the legislature. Section 1 says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. So we created the legislative branch. We gave them powers. We even talked about when they're supposed to be elected, how many, blah, 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 their qualifications for election. We gave it form in Article 1, the legislative branch. Article 2, we gave form and responsibilities, powers vested in a president of the United States. Talks about when they're supposed to be elected, what's their term, blah, blah, blah. That's the Article 2 executive branch. Article 3, the judicial branch. Judicial powers of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and such inferior courts, et cetera, et cetera. Talks about the jurisdiction and, shall hold their offices during good behavior. I think we need to look into that. What's good behavior mean? But anyways, that's where we gave form and responsibilities and jurisdiction to the judicial branch. So where in the Constitution did we give them the ability to control and create the grand jury. Read it again. It's not in there. We didn't do that. The 3 branches of government, 1, 2, and 3, Article 1, 2, and 3, we didn't do any of that. So that's why I believe today's system, they are statutory puppet grand juries. They're born of statute, not born of the people. They're blocked. They block the people. They're weapons of the state. A prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich because they control everything. So let me back up. When was the last time you heard about a grand jury out of their own initiative beginning an investigation without being called by a judge or a prosecutor? Well, doing some research trying to answer that question, Creighton Law Review had a story in 1902, a Minneapolis grand jury on its own initiative hired private detectives and collected enough evidence to indict the mayor and force the police chief to resign. The same grand jury virtually governed the city until a new administration could be hired. Similar events occurred in San Francisco 5 years later when a grand jury indicted the mayor and replaced him. All right. Also, around that same time, we found a newspaper article, 1901, in the Manatee County Grand Jury, Manatee, Florida. They issued a presentment after a complete audit of their local government. Now, in this article, so they do a complete audit. They do a presentment. They put it in the newspaper for all to see to hold them accountable. In the audit, they said, the jail needs cleaning. This office needs a new safe, and there's $9,026 and change missing in the financial audit. So, dude, when was the last time you heard your local grand jury auditing your local government from top to bottom? It doesn't happen today, does it? Why? They're controlled by the judges and the prosecutors, but they're not supposed to be. So let me ask you this. Where do you think this is written? The grand jury, in addition to the duty of formally indicting those charged with crime, has the further important duty of making investigations on its own initiative, which it will report as a presentment. This duty permits the investigation of how public officials are conducting their offices and discharging their public trusts. The grand jury may investigate as to whether public institutions are being properly administered and conducted. It has the power to inspect those institutions and, if necessary, may call before the grand jury those in charge of the operations of public institutions as well as any other person who has information and can testify concerning them. If the grand jury finds that an unlawful, improper, or corrupt condition exists, it may recommend a remedy. Where do you think that is written? Today, that is written in the Florida Grand Jury Handbook. They have that power today, but that's why I call them statutory puppet grand juries. So why aren't we the people through the grand jury reaching inside our government and rooting out corruption like the founders intended? Why aren't we doing that every single day instead of waiting for the next election to maybe hold them accountable? Well, through the research I found in 1994, there's a law review article in the Yale Law Journal by Renee Leto. She wrote it's titled Reviving Federal Grand Jury Presentments. She said, in part, at common law, the presentment function was at least as important as the indictment. Its inclusion in the Constitution shows its significance to the framers. For all practical purposes, the 1946 Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure have abolished the grand jury's presentment power. This law allegedly codified the existing common law practice respecting grand juries. By the rules essentially subject the presentment power to the discretion of the court. Rule 6E3 places great discretion in the hands of the judges and the government prosecutor. According to the rules, the grand jury cannot make any disclosure, including a presentment, without court permission. At common law, no such permission was necessary. So Rule 7, which governs indictment and information, makes no provision for presentments. The historical notes to the rule state, presentment is not included as an additional type of formal accusation since presentments as a method of instituting prosecutions are obsolete, at least as concerns the federal courts. So what happened there? They didn't amend the Constitution. Presentments are not illegal. They're still there. They're still there in the Fifth Amendment, protecting us. We still have the power. All they did in a footnote, all they did was refer to them as obsolete. Now remember, we never granted the institutional branch of government authority to control the grand jury, so why was Congress making a law that's not in Article 1, Section 8? of the Constitution. We didn't enumerate that power to them, but they did it. And what did they do? They didn't make it illegal. All they said was, well, in the footnote, they said, well, they're obsolete. So here's a question. What has the Supreme Court said about the grand jury? Well, the United States Supreme Court, U.S. versus Williams in 1992. Now, I didn't just say 1804, some obscure year. And what I'm going to read to you isn't just one sentence that could be taken out of context. In a 6-3 opinion, the majority opinion, Scalia wrote, because the grand jury is an institution separate from the courts, over whose functioning the courts do not preside, we think it clear that, as a general matter at least, no such supervisory judicial authority exists. Rooted in long centuries of Anglo-American history, the grand jury is mentioned in the Bill of Rights, but not in the body of the Constitution. It has not been textually assigned, therefore, to any of the branches described in the first 3 articles. It's a constitutional fixture in its own right. In fact, the whole theory of its function is that it belongs to no branch of the institutional government, serving as a kind of buffer or referee between the government and the people. That's what Scalia said. He also said, recognizing this tradition of independence, we have said that the Fifth Amendment's constitutional guarantee presupposes an investigative body acting independently of either prosecuting attorney or judge. Since that would run, they were just explaining something, and it said, since that would run counter to the whole history of the grand jury institution, in which laymen conduct their inquiries unfettered by technical rules. The grand jury can investigate merely on suspicion that the law is being violated, or even because it wants assurance that it is not. Even in this setting, however, we have insisted that the grand jury remain free to pursue its investigations unhindered by external influence or supervision, so long as it does not trench upon the legitimate rights of any witness called before it. The grand jury requires no authorization from its constituting court to initiate an investigation. And in its day-to-day functioning, the grand jury generally operates without the interference of a presiding judge. It swears in its own witnesses and deliberates in total secrecy. Supreme Court, 1992, 6-3. Majority opinion, Antonin Scalia. So here's a summary. Now I have the whole thing. This is only part of the quotes, by the way. I have the whole thing in the book, Consent to the Governed. You can get it at jasonwhoyt.com. By the way, for the most important and up-to-date information, text me. Text Hoyt, H-O-Y-T, to the number 64600. That's Hoyt, H-O-Y-T. That's my number. That's my last name. Text that to 64600. Now here's a summary of the key points that they made. I'm not going to read through all of that, but let me ask you this. Why are individuals, business owners, and corporations prosecuted for fraud and bribery while the government is not? Have you ever thought of that? We hear the news stories all the time, but the government is never investigated for fraud and bribery. Why? Because the presiding judge and the state attorneys and the prosecutors control the grand jury, control our most powerful weapon, the grand jury itself. So what cases do you think should go before the grand jury? Here's one. How about bribery for the implementation of Common Core? Bribery is an act of giving money or gifts that alters the behavior of the recipient. Bribery constitutes a crime and is defined by Black's Law Dictionary as the offering, giving, receiving, or soliciting of any item of value to influence the actions of an official or other person in charge of a public or legal duty. Now, you and I have been told that bribery of an official is, they just benefited personally with cash and stuck it in their pocket. No. That's not what the definition says. In fact, there were articles back in 2012 that said Obama bribed states to adopt national education curriculum. Remember Race to the Top? Ooh, we'll give you federal dollars, Race to the Top money, but buried in the details were you have to accept Common Core when it comes out. And every single school board that bought that, every state Department of Education that took that money, they need to be investigated for bribery. So here's the question. What if a group of your peers, in the form of a grand jury, acting independently outside the institutional branch of government, as Scalia said, as the Supreme Court agreed, as it was the case for centuries since Magna Carta. What if the people, using the presentment power already protected in the Constitution, open up an investigation and charge your local school board with bribery and charge your state board of education with bribery? What if they did that? And then they were sent to a petite jury where they can defend themselves. And what if another jury of your peers, 12 people in that jury or whatever the case may be in your state, what if they found them guilty? That, my folks, is consent of the governed. That's where we judge the law. We reach inside the government and root out corruption. We charge them with a crime. They defend themselves, but the people still find them guilty of that crime. Man, that is power, folks. That's what it's all about. That is we the people giving our consent to the governed on a daily basis. Here's a quote from the 7th Amendment. In suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. A couple phrases in here in the 7th Amendment. You probably hadn't read that one in a long time. Blow the dust off of that one. But in a system of government where it is so important to a people to be judged by a jury of peers, it says no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States. And how? It says, then according to the rules of the common law. All right, well, what are the rules of the common law? In all those places and a lot more in my book, Consent to the Governed. Go to jasonwhoyt.com to get it. jasonwhoyt.com to get the book and get all the research, get all the sources, all the references. But what are the rules of the common law? You got to go to Magna Carta. Magna Carta is the common law, as the American Bar Association said, etc., etc. Clause 52 of Magna Carta says, if anyone has been dispossessed or removed by us without the legal judgment of his peers, from his lands, castles, franchises, or from his right, we will immediately restore them to him. And if a dispute arise over this, then let it be decided by the 25 barons of whom mention is made below in the clause for securing the peace. So what is the clause for securing the peace? Right here, they mention the 25 barons. That's the grand jury. That's where it was codified, first in Magna Carta. Clause 61 says, if we or our justices or our bailiffs, basically if our administration shall in anything be at fault toward anyone, or shall have broken any one of the articles of the peace or of this security, they said, if we infringe on anyone's rights, or if we break the law of the land, and the offense be notified to 4 barons of the foresaid 25, the 4 barons, that's the administrators, that's the foremen, that's the investigators. So you got to let them know first. The said 4 barons shall repair to us, and laying the transgression before us, petition to have that transgression redressed without delay. So those 4 barons, those administrators, investigators, the foremen, right there, the First Amendment of our Constitution protects them to petition the government for redress of grievances. And if they haven't done, they have to redress without delay, it says. And if we shall not have corrected the transgression within 40 days, reckoning from the time it has been intimated to us, the 4 barons aforesaid shall refer that matter to the rest of the 25 barons, and then then the grand jury shall, together with the community of the whole, distrain and distress us in all possible ways, namely by seizing our castles, lands, possessions, and in any other way they can, until redress has been obtained as they deem fit. What is the point of justice? It's to right the wrongs. It's to restore the victim, and to make sure that the person committing the crime doesn't do it again. But it's about restoring the victim. So what does it say again? You bring it to the administrators, to the 4 barons. You bring it to them first. They write up the presentment. They let them know, look, you're in trouble. You did this wrong. You've got 40 days to correct the problem. What is the king? What is the administration? What is the government officials? What is their responsibility? They have to either admit that they did something wrong and fix the problem and restore the victim, or they can disagree with one of your points, one of your facts. They can disagree with it. And they can say, look, they can offer a rebuttal to one of them, and then it has to be reviewed by the grand jury. And then the grand jury is going to vote again to see how they should proceed. But if they do nothing, actually, let me get to that point in just a second, but they could also say, look, I want to defend myself. I want to present my case. The right of trial by jury shall be preserved. So they could call for a trial before a petite jury where they can defend themselves and have guilt, not guilt, be determined by them. But if they do nothing during that 40 days, if they acquiesce, which is a legal term, if they acquiesce, they admit to guilt, and they say, if we haven't done it within 40 days, distrain and distress us in all possible ways. Distrain and distress are legal terms for the process whereby relief is brought to a victim involving the assets of the offender. Remember that pastor who didn't pay his people as employees and didn't have his matching, didn't have his tax stuff right? He got sentenced to 10 years in prison. While he was there, what did they do to him? They took his property, sold it at auction, used the assets to pay the victim. Well, who's the victim? Well, it was the IRS. They didn't get money. They didn't get the proper amount of money. But in this case, here's what Black's Law Dictionary says about distrain and distress. Distrain, to take as a pledge property of another and keep the same until he performs his obligation. But distress is the taking of personal chattel out of the possession of the wrongdoer and into the custody of the party injured. That's what it said. Dude, this has been around for 800 years, since Magna Carta. So I've done a lot of interviews on this stuff. If you text Hoyt, H-O-Y-T, to the number 64600, my system will send you a link to some recent interviews, to a lot of blog posts. But let me review really quick. I know we're running up on an hour here. Tonight we discussed some key and foundational aspects of the book, like this. This wasn't my idea. I'm not some guy who's just got just another book with just another set of opinions on what's wrong with the country, how we should fix it. Go to jasonwhoyt.com and order Consent of the Governed. And as it said, I'm a political archaeologist uncovering what's been there all along. Tonight we also talked about the empty promise of accountability, the tired rallying cry, we got to hold them accountable. We talked about the most powerful word in the Constitution, that's presentment in the Fifth Amendment. That's where a grand jury, on their own initiative, can open up an investigation and can bring charges. We also talked about how the people are supposed to act as a sword and a shield, protecting people from wrongful accusation and reaching inside our government to root out corruption. We also talked about how and when the people's most powerful weapon was hijacked, essentially 1946, where they didn't make it illegal. They didn't remove presentment from the Constitution, from the Fifth Amendment, the supreme law of the land where they all swore an oath to protect and defend. What did they do? They passed a law without any authority. And then at the footnote, they said presentments are obsolete. We also talked about why every politician should fear my book. Can you imagine what would happen? How would your local government act if they knew that at any given moment, the people can call them up and force them to testify before them about their operation? Can open up an investigation. Look, if your local county government voted on some huge construction contract and county seat number 3, his cousin got the no-bid landscaping contract, the local grand jury can open up an investigation to see if maybe even ethics violations are being violated. They can do these things, but they don't. But they should. But most importantly, you discovered why we don't have to wait for elections to hold our government accountable. Because, man, you travel around, I talk to a lot of people. People are frustrated. People are really frustrated. Well, we got an election coming up. Maybe we can change things. Maybe, just maybe, if we knock on enough doors, maybe, just maybe, my guy might get elected. And maybe, just maybe, if enough people around the country get elected, maybe, just maybe, they'll go to D.C. and maybe they'll pass a law to maybe give us our natural God-given rights back. Well, you know what? That's not how it's supposed to work. We're not supposed to just wait every 2 years to maybe, just maybe, change things around and maybe get... I have natural God-given rights, and so do you. And the proper role of government is to secure these rights, not to infringe upon them. And we have to hold them accountable every single day. And we have that power, and we have for 800 years. Again, text Hoyt to 64600. Here's the deal. In the book, I do an extensive study about what happened in Dixie County, Florida. You will be floored. You'll be shocked. His trial actually is February 1st, 2016. It's scheduled to be. I've been called as a key witness because of my research and because of what I witnessed while going there numerous times. Look at the hashtag Justice for Terry. So many people have been going up to Dixie County for all these different hearings and all that, supporting this man. For example, this is the biggest blog post last year on my website. Terry was arrested in court at his arraignment. He was arrested for failure to appear. He spent 21 days in jail, including his 71st birthday. Right after the upper left-hand corner, we had 25 people filling out affidavits to what we witnessed. It's insane what's going on up there. He is a grand jury whistleblower because he was selected as a grand jury. He volunteered to be the foreman, and what he witnessed, you'll be shocked. Anyways, there's another case in Nebraska. You got to go to my website, jasonwhoyt.com, for all the details and all the updates, including, I did this blog post, could the injustice to the Hammond family and the Malheur Wildlife Refuge takeover, could they have been avoided? What you need to know. It's a huge blog post about what's going on there, where the townspeople set up what they call the Committee of Safety. Anyways, jasonwhoyt.com. The book is available in 3 formats. It's a paperback, it's an ebook, and I also put out a director's cut audio where I have the book. I read the book on audio, 6+ hours. But I have about 3+ hours of additional material. I interviewed Terry from Dixie County. We sat down for 15 minutes. We ended up talking for an hour and 15. It's a great interview. And the gentleman who is doing all that stuff in Nebraska and beyond, I interviewed him as well for well over an hour. But today's special, check it out. Buy the book. I'll send you the ebook for free. Again, the ebook, 300 hyperlinks to the external material and all the references that I have. But I also put together a package deal where you can get the paperback, the audio, and the ebook and save 40% when you buy all 3. Folks, thank you so much for sticking with me this long. Let's stay in touch. Go to my website, jasonwhoyt.com. I don't send very many emails, believe me. But get signed up, and I'll send you the latest and greatest. And on a daily basis, look for @JasonWHoyt on any of these social media platforms. That's where I really do a lot of daily and hourly interactions about what's going on. So God bless you. Thank you so much for tuning in. jasonwhoyt.com. Get the book, Consent to the Governed, The People's Guide to Holding Government Accountable. Thank you.